Bit of audio. There we go. Welcome, everyone. In the next 30, 40 minutes, we are going to talk about what's new in AL. It's going to be a lot about the AL extension and what we've put in there and what we've made of changes in there. A little bit about the language, but we're going to try and see if we can cover everything. Probably not all of it, but most of it. We have a lot to cover just from the things we've brought today. We're going to talk a lot about AL Explorer, the code analysis framework. We're going to talk about productivity improvements. We're going to talk about AL improvements, the attached debugger scenario, and some telemetry. So today I have Blanca with me here, and she, with me, are working on the developer tools team, and she will kick it off. There you go.
Yes. So let's start up with AL Explorer and AL Home, which was one of the latest additions with this last release. We have already seen it in the keynote, but let's look at it a bit over again. So the AL Explorer is a tool that you can find as part of the AL extension. It's a web view, and here you can navigate and explore your code. It also allows you to understand the structure of your code by providing a very comprehensive overview. So maybe newcomers can get more familiar more easily with your application. It also allows you to interact with some of the objects. You can, for example, go to source code, you can run some objects, you can bookmark, and some other things. And it's also quite useful to discover extensibility points. So here you can find those points where you can extend and integrate the application. So let's look at how it looks like live. Yeah. So this is what the AL Explorer looks like from the AL extension. Yeah, you have 4 tabs here. The first one is the objects one. You have a list of all the objects of your application, and also all the reference objects, so also the ones from your dependencies. You can also search any object if you know its ID or name. You can also group them by several aspects here. So for example, yeah, like a type. You can also see the modules. So here, for example, you can filter them by the bookmarked. So if you are working with a set of objects, maybe in your development process, then it's quite handy because you can find them here very easily. Then the 4 other tabs, these are the extensibility points. So for the events, here you can find the list of all the event publishers, event that you can subscribe to, and you can easily do it from here. Then you have the APIs tab. So this is also the list of all the API pages and queries. So if you want to access your application from an external source, then you can easily look here which one you can use. And last of all, we have the extensible enums that implement interfaces. So again, if you want to extend your application in a structured manner, then you can use this extensible enums. And this is the first step that we are taking towards kind of creating this development hub where developers can access it in their day-to-day and have all these handy tools just from one single UI. And together with AL Explorer, we also have the AL Home. This is also a web view. And here is where we will share the latest news for you, the developers. So we might share some important tips on how to be, for example, more proactive and efficient, like some performance patterns. We might also share some important announcements, so maybe any upcoming features or changes, or any bugs that might be important for you to be aware of. And it's also quite nice for us to see some features for you to discover that you might not be very familiar with. So make sure you have this enabled if you want to receive the latest updates. Yes, and then we also did some improvements to the code analyzer framework. So the code analyzer analysis framework, it's a big component in the perceived performance during code authoring. This is because every change you do while coding, for example, while you're typing, this will trigger a recalculation of all the code diagnostics. So of course, if you have large applications, this can be a big performance overhead. So to save you from this headache, we made a few improvements here. So for example, we optimized when the rules are run. We also fixed some efficiencies and also disabled those rules that no longer run. And one of the biggest one of the biggest changes here is that we added this new file scope. So this means that code analysis only runs on the current file. So of course, this is a big performance advantage because you don't have to run it through all the files. You might lose some diagnostics, but most diagnostics are local anyways. And you can also get the full diagnostics doing a full build. So this has quite a few advantages for you that you might have already perceived. So you can now use code analysis regardless of the size of your workspace. Also, if you have a big application, you can also continue to use code analysis because we will only look at the current file. And then you can, so some developers would disable this because of this big performance overhead. So you no longer have to wait for the CI/CD pipelines or doing a full build. And you can customize this using the background code analysis setting. So this is a new setting that we have added. The current behavior that we have is that if you work with a workspace that is smaller than 100 files, so small workspaces, then we run all the code analysis for all files, unless you have it disabled. But if you are working with workspaces that have more than 100 files, then you use the background code analysis setting to define that behavior. And here, basically, you can set 3 values. You can set it to file or true. This is the default setting that we discussed before. And this basically means that code analysis will only be run on the active file. You can also set it to project, which means that this will run on all the files of the active project. Or you can also disable it by setting it to none, so no code analysis will run. This also depends on the scope where you set this setting. So of course, you can set it at folder level. In that case, it will only apply to the current project. You can also set it to the workspace level. In that case, it will apply to all the projects in the workspace. Or you can also set it on the user settings, which will apply to all the projects, all the files, all the projects in all of the workspaces. And then for dependent projects, this of course depends on the setting that you use for that project. And basically, it will only run code analysis on that project if you have the background code analysis setting set to project. Also, within these code analysis improvements, we also added a new parameter, so output analyzer statistics setting, which basically shows you a summary of all the rules that were run and also the time that was spent per rule. So it's quite useful because it will allow you to discover which rules are running, and maybe you want to disable some of them because they are not very useful or relevant to your case. So you can run faster. And you can also see which rules are low performing. So you can also disable these rules during code authoring, and then you can also get them later during the full build or through the CI/CD pipelines. And another improvement that we have made within the code analyzer framework was that we now support URLs for external rule sets. So this makes it easier to share and maintain and enforce common rules. And there are basically 2 ways you can do that. So the first way is that you can use the AL rule set path setting, and then you specify the URL for the external rule set, and then you can disable or enable this path using the enable external route set. So you don't have to change that URL. And then the second option is that you can use, you can add a URL in the include route set setting, in the route set folder, using the path parameter. And then you can also use this from the AL compiler using the enable external route sets parameter. And then, as like in every release, we also added new analyzer rules. So there are quite a few of them. I won't go through all of them in detail, but let's look have an overview of what are these ones. So we have added quite a few rules for the app source scope rules. So we have added some rules regarding the protected variables breaking changes. So for example, if you rename it or modify them, then there are some rules to govern those changes. Then we also added a setting, a rule to to warn about changing normal tables to temporary. Then we added also a few rules regarding permission set extensions, basically because you can use them to grant more permissions that you intended to. Then we also added new rules for the name, sorry about that, the name attribute, yeah, so for the business events, we also added business events, so of course we also added some rules against that. Then for the per tenant extension cops, we also added the similar rules regarding the permission set extensions, and also some rules for the application property. We also added a new UI cop rule, so for when the actions with the repeater scope. And then we also updated a UI cop rule regarding the about text and about title properties. Then for the new code cop rules, we also added a rule to, so when you use a pragma warning disable, you have to specify explicitly the codes of those diagnostics that you're disabling them, instead of disable all of them, because some developers will forget about that. And then similar rules for the permission set usage. Okay, so let's look a bit more into those new permission set extension rules, because they are quite a bit everywhere. So basically with the permission set extensions, right now we have added a rule or several rules that to detect the cases where you use a permission set extension to include permissions for an object or a permission set that is defined in another application. So you can use this to extend permissions, existing permissions in another application. And you can also use a wildcard permission to grant global access. So we are adding rules against that. And why? Well, basically because this is a very bad practice. So this can incur a security risk by granting excessive privileges to users. So in the first case, a user with an existing permission can create a permission set extension, can extend its own permissions, and then can publish it up. So it can basically extend its own permissions and have more permissions than what it was originally intended to. And then also wildcard permissions can also be a security risk because you can get more or grant more privileges than you would like to. So this is not enforced for upload PTE or submission or for app source submission at this point, but it might be enforced at a later point, or we might just not have support for doing this in the future. And then Steffen is going to talk a bit more about the productivity improvements.
Let's see if I can. Yeah, there we go. So thank you for this overview of some of the analyzer and productivity improvements there. We've heard a lot of your feedback, and we've spent some time on the team to think about what are the things that we can do to help you guys be a little more productive. We can't bring back Seaside if anybody is interested. We're not going to do that. But let's look at a few of those things. So one of the things we looked at was the temporary identifier. So when you're writing code and you don't have the declaration of a variable in scope, it can be really hard to see whether a variable is a temporary variable or not, unless you name your variables temp, so forth. Maybe not everyone does that, but it can be difficult. So we added this IntelliSense here that gives you insights into the fact that this variable here is a temporary record. And you can all see the benefits of that. We've also changed the way we use identifiers in events. So normally today you would specify the event publisher by specifying a name in a string, and that is, it works, but it's perhaps not what we wanted. We wanted it to be a symbol. So we made it an identifier, which unlocks all of the greatness we have in Visual Studio Code for references. So one of those great references is the code lens. And when you use the code lens, or when you change your event subscriber or your event publisher into an identifier, you can actually see who's using it here by clicking the link in references. Okay, so you can see here we have a event that we can now see both the subscriber and the publisher in one view, which is really nice. It allows you to skip through the different implementations where we have a subscriber and actually see what the different implementations do. Okay. It also works the other way around. So when you go and click on the name of the publisher, press F12, you can go to that publisher. Really nice. So how do we change this? It's quite easy. We made a code action for you, so it's pretty simple. You just have to change the string into a identifier, and then you're done. You can do that using the code action, and you can choose to do it for all your subscribers in the current document, the current workspace, project, you name it. Very easy. And there we go. 1, 2, 3, it's done. Should be super easy for all of you to do it, so you get the insights that Visual Studio Code can provide for you, and make it much easier for you to navigate through the different publisher and subscribers. We took this idea also to interfaces, where we added the go-to implementations. So this allows you to pick an interface and see all the implementations of that interface quite easily. Right-click, press go to implementations, or Control F12 if you want to use the shortcuts. Pretty nice. As interfaces is one of the key components of building reusable and nice maintainable code, it's also very nice that we can actually now go, one more. We can actually go and see all the implementations from a variable. So I have an interface declaration in my code unit, and I can see all the different implementations here, so I can go and check which one I need to go fix or add a new one if it's missing, and so forth. That's pretty nice. Okay. You do that there, and you get that overview. Okay. So last release, I think it was, we added the ability for you to move application area from a field and up until the page level, so you didn't have to write application area everywhere. Some of us have been writing pages for a long time with application area in there, so cleaning that up is a bit tedious. Of course, we made a function for you to remove those redundant application areas. And we made another one to promote, the other way around, okay? To promote those. And again, you can do it on a workspace, on a project, and on the specific instance or document. Okay, more to come. When working with multiple projects, you might find it a bit challenging to either copy or download the dependencies between all those projects. We've now made it possible for you to specify additional package cache paths. And then you can share now the downloaded or copied distributed packages between all your projects, having them on a shared folder or download site or something, so you can easily get access to Another path-related change is folder paths for control add-ins. Some of you might have tried this. You need to specify a million different resources for a control add-in. One at a time, you sit there and type them in, hope it's all right, no typos and everything. Now you can use a wildcard. Isn't that nice? And it works even for scripts, style sheets, and images. And now you don't have to type in every single file, and it works if you add a file, that is also added, and all these things. That's really nice. Okay. Let's stop with some of these productivity improvements and talk about the AL improvements. And I'm going to go through a few of them, not all of them, but a few of them. A new one is formatting. So on reports, you now have a format region, which allows you to render a report in a different format than what your current session is in. So you can have a Danish guy in a Danish session actually rendering a German report, which is quite nice. There's a language table that you can use to find the language ID that you need in order to render this. Go try that out. On records, we added the read isolation property that allows you to control the log escalations. It requires some knowledge and some training on that. I recommend you to go and look at the session tomorrow on logging in AL to learn much more about this read isolation property. We've also added the set table on record refs. Now you can actually work on the same data both in your record ref and your record, which is also a very needed feature. On streams, the in-stream specifically, we have added maybe a bit overdue, I would say, position and reset position, which allows you to control the position on your stream and actually reread the stream instead of recreating a new one every time. It's very nice. Some of you might have used inherit entitlements and inherit permissions. We have now alignment on these two functionalities that allows you to write code where you control both the license in terms of entitlement and the permission from code, giving you the ability to write core business critical processes that should work regardless of whether a user has permissions or has entitlements. This helps a lot. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about entitlements for licensing. So how many out here knows about monetization in Business Central? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, a few, okay. So this is going to be technical and it might be a bit tricky, so bear with me. I'm just going to use 5 minutes talking a lot about entitlements. It's a passion of mine. Okay, imagine a scenario. I want to create an app source app that has licensing support out of the box. I want to support 2 scenarios, gold and silver, 1 or 2. And I want to make sure that there's a trial scenario for new customers. And I want to make sure that I support some custom licensing that I used to have. So in my existing app, I might have called out to my home server and said, hey, this AAD tenant is trying to access some feature. Can he do that? And then I would allow him to continue or not continue, whether or not he's registered with me. I want that functionality to continue working. Okay, so the first thing I do in my feature here is or my application is to create a couple of feature sets. So this is the way I like to do it. You can do it whatever you like. We need to define some permissions that covers areas of my application that I can either turn on or turn off depending on what license you have. So here I have 3 features. Then I'm going to define the maximum permissions a user can have if he's assigned one of my licenses. So I'm going to define a gold permission set that includes the features that are available when you have the gold license. I'm going to do the same thing for the silver. And then finally, I'm going to do a trial. And why am I doing a trial here? It's because there's really no trial support in the licensing that we get from Microsoft. So we need to build in license or trial license into our product. So this will cover both the trial, where I'll add some kind of date check, and the custom licensing on the same maximum permission set. Okay, so far so good? Everyone with me? Let's try the next step. The next step is to define the license. So the first thing I do is I create an entitlement that defines a license for my gold, in this case. And it could look something like this. So here we have my gold entitlement. I define it using this new entitlement type called per user offer plan. Offer plan comes from app source. You have an offer in app source, and you have a plan that actually defines this kind of license. Then you define the ID as being the fully qualified name of that plan in app source. And then I map it to some permissions. And you can't really see that here, but the last line there of object entitlements is the permission set that I defined previously, the maximum permissions for my gold scenario. Okay, I can do that also for my silver, as you can see here again, per user offer plan, and I define the ID, full qualified ID of my plan in app source, and then I say these are the maximum permissions, these are the things that people are entitled to when they have my license. Finally, I need to do the same thing for the trial. Here, because we don't have really a trial, but we do have something called unlicensed. So I will use the type unlicensed, so when a user comes into Business Central and he's using my app and is unlicensed, these are the entitlements, or these are the maximum permissions he's entitled to use. So far, so good. One key thing to mention here. The way entitlements work, the way you're entitled to applications today, the objects in your applications today, is implicit. This means that when you upload an app to Business Central, you have access to all the objects. So you are licensed to use all the objects in your application. Then you add permissions on top of that to control that. When you add one of these entitlements objects in your application, the implicit entitlements go away. So when you add the first entitlement object in your extension, that is the only entitlement a user will be given, based on whatever requirements you put in that entitlement. So no more implicit. Okay. So far, so good. Now, then I need to use this somehow, right? So let's see how we can use that. Here we go. So here is an example of some code I could write. I could use all the existing permission system we have. I could use access by permission and say, if you have execute write to something, then you can get access to this action. Here I'm using the details of the permission set. So I know that this object may only grant you access permission or execute permission in my gold or in my silver scenario. It's maybe a bit tricky to use it like this. You can also use the normal like read access or write permission or read permission, write permission from an object like a table. Again, you're looking into that an object exists with a certain permission in a certain permission set. It can be a bit tricky. So we want something easier to say whether it's gold or it's silver or it's unlicensed, right? Okay, so here I have another scenario. This is my do work app. The first thing I'll ask here is whether the current user is entitled to my entitlement set, right? So this will essentially tell me whether the user that is currently signed in is assigned a license that entitles him to my entitlement set. If he is, then I can do something, and then we're all good. The next scenario here is whether or not the user is unlicensed. So a user is coming in. I have defined the unlicensed entitlement set. So therefore, we can know whether the user is unlicensed for my application. If he's not unlicensed, but he's not gold, then he has some kind of license, but not something my code supports yet, so I need to throw an error, obviously. Okay, the third scenario here is custom licensing. So if I know he is unlicensed, and I have an existing custom licensing model, then this is the place where I need to go call home and say, is the person licensed in the old system? If he is, hey, we continue doing that. And last but not least, we have the trial scenario where I can maybe save the date for first time he does some kind of operation, and then validate whether it's been 30, 60, 90, whatever days. And that's my trial. Okay. If you want to try it out, it's currently being released. It's still in public preview, as it's around public preview right now. And you'll find it by this small flag in App Source, where you can choose to sell through Microsoft, yes or no. If you choose yes, and you define a plan, then your plan will show up in the marketplace. This is a hello world example, but still it proves the point. When you go to the marketplace, you'll see the list of plans and prices, and the customer can buy direct from the marketplace if they so chooses. You can have hidden plans and other configurations that allows you to control this more granularly, maybe ship it to specific customers with specific prices and so on. All of that to be learned more on online. Look at the documentation. If you're all staring at a blank here and saying, what's an app and what app source? Tomorrow we have a nice session, actually today, we have a nice session on app source demystifization, if I can say that word. So come talk to us about that and listen what we have to say. Okay, enough with licensing, even though I love licenses. We have to take it back a step. Let's see, oh yeah, plans and yep, there we go. Okay. Let's go one step back into new things in AL. External business events, we've talked a lot about it, both at the keynote, at the sessions around Power Apps and Power Platform. And we're also going to talk about it here because it's really important. The new external business event is the only way you can raise events outside of Business Central. There are some web hooks, lookalikes today in Business Central, but this is the right way of doing it. And this is what we're going to use going forward. We talked about permissions. This is another way of doing permissions. You can restrict to who can subscribe to these external business events by putting in the required permission. Here you could say you can only have my gold. You can only use this if you have my gold subscription, for example. Okay, you can even do custom categories by extending the event category enum. Error. Let's talk about errors. Okay, so with error info, we added two new methods. The add method, or add action method, that allows you to add a button where a user can invoke some kind of code unit method, where maybe we can fix up some data or run some other code that will do something to get the user out of trouble. Or we can add a navigation action where the user can perhaps get a setup page, or maybe they open the record where the issue happened. It can look something like this. And now I'm going to turn it back to Blanca, who's going to talk to us about more error things in the debugging scenario.
Yes, so one of the big things that we also came up with in the latest release was attach debugger for regular debugger. So this was also a highly requested feature, and here it is. So basically here, we've done a few improvements to regular debugging. And from now on, you can debug any existing user session. So that means that you can, of course, regular debug your own existing session, as you could do before, but you can also debug any other user session. So it's quite useful if you, for example, have a customer and the customer encounters an error, then you can log in, you can access their session, and you can debug that session, and you can troubleshoot that session and discover what's going on. You can also debug any next session, also for any user. So this is also quite useful because it unblocks the scenario of service-to-service calls where there's no user involved. So now you can actually do this with regular debugging. And with these improvements, we achieve parity between snapshot debugging capabilities and regular debugging capabilities. So everything that you could do before with, you had to do before with snapshot debugging, now you can also do with regular debugging. So now regular debugging is even more powerful for your everyday development. And this unblocks a few scenarios. So you can connect to an existing session using the user ID. So to do this, you need to get the user ID. So if you are working for, you want to debug, for example, a web client session, then you can go to Help and Support. You will find there the session ID, and then you can copy that, and then you can, in your launch configuration, then you can add that session ID and debug that session. And here, note that the break on next parameter, here it's not really important because that session ID is sufficient to know which session it is. So we don't need to specify that type of session. You can also attach to an existing session for a specific user. So in this case, you specify again the session ID, and you specify the user you want to debug the session for, so the owner of that session. If that user turns out to not be the owner of that session, then that debug request will fail. And the last of all, you can also attach to the next session of a specific user. So if you want to debug the next session of a given type, you specify that type with the break on next parameter. So that can be a background session, a web service session, or a web client session. And then you use this user ID to specify that the user you want to debug that session for. And if you want to know more about that, just stay for the next session. We will talk about more regular debugging and so on within the context of all the debug capabilities that we have. I turned a bit earlier, but for telemetry, we also have some improvements for telemetry. Telemetry is something that many of you probably can take more advantage of. It has many applications. It can give you great insights of the activities and operations that are going inside your application. You can also see the errors that users encounter. You can also diagnose them and help you troubleshoot those issues using the telemetry. You can also analyze the performance of your application, see any database statements or any inefficient AL methods. And you can use this information to self-mitigate these errors, so you can do it for yourself. You can also have an in-depth analysis, again, of the performance, of the usage of the different aspects of your application. And you can have a better understanding of the customer usage and challenges. And if you're not very familiar with it and want to get started, you can check out our link with ak.ms, BC Telemetry samples, where we have some sample telemetry, and you can use it to play around with it and get a feel of what it looks like, and perhaps use it for your own scenario. And as we also mentioned earlier in the keynote, we also have AI insights on this data. So as for the improvements themselves, we added, we can now troubleshoot the errors that users can see. So you can see which errors are these, where they come from, what they are, and so on. You can also do a similar thing with those permission issues that users might encounter. You can also see information about the login performance. So you can see, for example, if there were any long-running AL methods or any long-running SQL statements or any log timeouts and so on. You can also see more insights on the long-running AL methods, so you can see which one are those, how much time they're taking, and other quite relevant information. You also have telemetry on outgoing web service performance. Then you also have telemetry on the app updates, so you can see which app updates failed, the data transfer usage, and so on. You can also track performance of the test results over time, so not only for a test run, but also throughout the different test runs. And last of all, you also have telemetry on the usage of ALGO for GitHub, so the different ALGO events that were used and which one are these. So let's see a bit what this look like in the UI. So one of these additions are you can now troubleshoot the errors that users can see. So you can see which customers are experiencing these errors and how many. You can also see the message of course, what these errors say, not only in the language of the customer itself, but also in English. So I guess that's very helpful if you don't speak the language of your customer. And you can also see where do these errors come from, where apps do they come from. And similar to before, you also have this overview with permission issues. You can also see which customers are experiencing these permission issues. You can see what errors do they see and where they come from. And yeah, so that was it for telemetry and for our presentation itself. You can check more resources here. If you have a question, you can reach us on Yammer. If you're looking for more resources, then make sure to check BCO. Submit your ideas, BC ideas. You have here all the relevant links if you want to contact us. We also have here some interesting links also if you want to get started. And we also added a survey here. So just make sure to check it out. If you want to say something, let us help us understand what do you want, what do you need by answering that survey. And yeah, I think that's it for the presentation.
We have time for one, maybe two, if they're short questions. Anybody want to try out this one? We have one over here. Yeah. Here you go. Ooh. That's a pull through. There you go. It should be turned on. Try again. No? Can we turn on the orange one?
Try the other one. The other catch box.
We try the other one then. Yeah. So maybe just one question. But then you get a T-shirt also. No, I won't throw it. Hand it over. This work? No? No, let's try again. Maybe just state your question, I'll repeat it.
Attaching to the session?
Yes.
If we specify the user ID of the user running the background session, can we debug background sessions using that?
Can you debug background sessions using a user ID? That is a good question.
Yes.
Can we do that? I would say, normally I would say yes, because we can debug background sessions, so having a user ID on that should be fine. Now, in front of all of you, I might be wrong. But please try it out, give us a holler if it doesn't work, and we'll see if we can get it to work. Thank you. Good question, though. We can do one more. One more. Over there. Yes. Yes. You guys got good questions. You can create all the rules you want. So the real question is, can you get it to run with our rules? And as it is today, no, there is no simple way of doing that. There are attempts out there in the community, people who hack into this and get it to run with our rules. But as we speak today, there's no prescribed way of you adding to our rules as such. You can add your own VS Code extension that does your own rules, but not add to ours at this point. Yeah. Go to BC Ideas, add your vote, click, 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 click. Yeah, get it up there, get it prioritized. Okay, that's it for us. Thank you very much for attending, and please stay here for the next one.